Welcome to In Focus, brought to you from the Up North Media Center. I'm your host, Kimberli Bindschatel. With me is my co-host, Anthony Weber. Today we're going to discuss the boundaries of personal freedom. Where do our rights end and we start to infringe on the rights of others? With us today in the studio is Grant Parsons. He is an attorney from a small firm here in the Traverse City area, has been there for 30 years, and he specializes in civil rights cases. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Also, we have Susan Odgers. She has a long list of accolades. She was the recent recipient, actually in 2010, of the Traverse City Human Rights Commission Sarah Hardy Humanitarian of the Year Award. Congratulations. She is a community connector here and has been a longtime board member with Michigan Protection and Advocacy Services, Munson Medical Center Family Advisory Council, Recipients' Rights, and the Cowell Cancer Center, and the Traverse City Chamber of Commerce Leadership Grant Traverse and Fellows Program. She also has a major in English and Communication Arts, holds multiple degrees, and obviously has been honored during that time with the prestigious Thomas Rumble Doctoral Fellowship at Wayne State University. She's been a counseling psychology consultant for 35 years. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Good to have you here, Susan.
Thanks, Anthony.
So I think what we'd like to do is start out with just an overview from each of you of what brought you to civil rights, the idea of personal freedoms, why it's important to you. And Susan, if you could start, just give us a little intro.
Okay. Probably personally, one of the things that has impacted me greatly is I was 18, almost 19, when I had a spinal stroke, and I became a person that is paralyzed from the waist down, and I use a manual wheelchair. So I was really thrown into the whole disability rights, and also as a woman in our culture, really started to see life from a very different vantage point. And what I realized as I looked to the elders in lots of different movements, I saw how similar many of them were, that the phrase "nothing about us without us" was really, really important. That too many times decisions that were being made that served different groups, there were very few people actually in those groups that were at the decision-making table. And so I continued on with my schooling, and that was a really important way for me to participate in the world and also give back. And now here in town, I've been at NMC over 25 years as an instructor, and what I really am concerned about is a process that people can believe in and that they see as trustworthy. I'm sure Grant will say something about this a little bit later, but even people who go through litigation, if they lose, yet they have felt that they have been heard and the process was really clean, it's easier for them to move forward with that decision as compared to people who even win but wonder if everything was really, if it was convoluted in any way or it wasn't a clean process. So I'm very interested in all those groups that you said that I'm involved in, that you mentioned in the bio, really concerned about process and really interested in how people make decisions. And especially because I spend so much time with young adults, really a lot of traditional age students, I feel like that's really an important part of the work that I do.
Thank you. Yeah,
So I pick up on something Susan just talked about. I mean, litigation has a voice. Our constitutional democracy is based on the idea that this is a very anti-majoritarian society. We live in a democracy where we all get together and make decisions, but each individual voice in the U.S. Constitution is extremely important in the Bill of Rights. Speech, religion, search and seizure laws, the right to jury trial. And when we start talking about the banging heads of individual rights with, for example, corporate rights, which is right now the big, more than the elephant in the room. When we start to talk about that, we talk about who has a voice in society, and that's why I'm interested in your topic.
Excellent.
So, Susan, have you seen a change, do you think, in your students? You said you've been at NMC for 25 years. Do you feel like the traditional student there, who was probably, what, 19, 20 in that age range, has there been a shift over time? Do you feel like there's a greater sense of the importance of personal freedoms and having everyone's voice be heard? Or does it feel a lot to you like we've been stuck in some kind of model that we're having a hard time breaking out of?
Well, one of the things I love about that question, Anthony, is that I know how I've changed personally and professionally during that time, so I'm really interested in what has happened to the students. And one of the things I have them do is every year they do a time capsule where they put whatever they think is relative to psychology and human sexuality in particular in that time capsule. And I know often my colleagues and the parents of the students think, things are crazy now. There are no boundaries. There's no personal responsibility, that nobody cares about values or love or any of that anymore. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The students, when you take away all the noise, all those things, the first chapter they want to read in the book is all about relationships and love and how you have successful relationships. And so what I have found is that students will come in and they'll say, I make most of my decisions from a religious point of view. And we talk about what does that mean to have that as your code. Others will say, well, I'm really an evidence-based person. I do research, I look at all the facts in a situation, I weigh all of that. That's what works for me. Someone else says, I'm kind of whatever the situation is. I might decide one thing in one situation and do something in another. And then there's a whole group of students that will say, whatever we're looking at, whatever the issue is, it's my personal taste and preference. So going back to something that Grant just got done saying, what do you do when people come at these decisions that affect the majority from all of those different points of view?
Right.
And some students will say, and I think it's part of their trying to figure out how much of what I believe comes from my family and my folks, what parts of that do I want to hang on to, which parts do I need to amend in some way, again, based on what you said, their ages. But then people will say, well, I'm a little bit of everything. And I think by the end of the course, they realize that there's one that's probably more predominant for them than just saying I'm a smorg of all of those ways to make decisions.
So Grant, what do you think when you look at trends in culture, as Susan's talking about how the students are coming in and haven't been 25 years, now we're talking people who are 45, 50 years old, so as they're coming in and they're gaining a broader sense of people coming at things from different directions and maybe gaining a broader appreciation of what people bring to the table as they make individual choices. Do you feel like, culturally speaking, we're trending toward a culture that is elevating individualism and personal freedom, or do you feel like the reverse is happening?
The reverse is happening. And I think about Susan's observations and educations about the way individuals grow, the way they learn to make decisions, the way they learn the fallacy that this is not, our generation's not going to probably end the world. It always seems like it's screwed up, but we always learn solutions. I come at it a little differently, where I watch a little bit of the history, and if you just really briefly start back, I was thinking about the show today before I came on it, and I was thinking, what do you identify as a trend, if you could almost graph it like the stock market, of individual rights and then societal policies that change over a period to either help individuals express themselves or deny individual self-expression. And if you go back to 54, when we're deciding the Brown v. Board of Education case, we're saying separate isn't equal, black people are just human beings that look a little differently. And we got to totally reorganize our society where we can't have racism as a policy. The government leads the policy. And then between 54 and 64 with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act, we then go to anti-war protests, we go to the creation of the environmental movement, we go to women's rights. It's a very expansive idealistic period. Now the son of a gun is, I come out of law school in the early 80s, just as the Nixonian sort of swing occurs when we start to move away from the idealism of the 60s and the 50s, Eisenhower 50s, Kennedy 60s, and we start imposing restrictions on the processes and the governmental policies of individual rights. And so I would like to suggest that in the last 30 years that I've been around, seriously, that, with the exception of gay rights, there's a case where individual rights, I would say, have increased by recognition, and gun users' rights. I think those rights have been expanded. Otherwise, every single individual right in the last 30 years, I think, is going in the wrong direction. It's constricting. It's going downward. And now we arrive at Hobby Lobby, Citizens United, these cases that are giving corporations rights that are more important as a national policy than individual rights to health care, reproductive rights, or speech. So the trend, in my humble opinion, is away from individual rights, with those two exceptions.
What do you think is causing that? I mean, who's
It's a
leading
political
the
shift.
Sure.
It's the shift in fundamental government from basically a Democratic government to a Republican government, and it has taken hold, and there ain't no fooling around about it this time.
Well, there's obviously myriad reasons, right, and that are all.
But that's a pretty strong one. That's a pretty central one. Because
but what's causing that, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And I think Susan made me think back to, when I first went to college, and I was, 18, 19, 20 years old, and at that time, had a very narrow view of the world from my own experiences. And my government class was actually called something like the elitism of democracy. And to me, it was very eye-opening. The instructor was very clear about, our idea of democracy is not actually what it is, and that elitism plays a huge role in that. At least that's my recollection from so many years back. But do you think what you're saying, this trend, is directly tied to that? Who are the elite in this country? They're leading the charge. They're leading the direction. What, why, how, what are these groups, and why is it that they've become so powerful to take a whole country's kind of views in a whole different direction? As you said, we had the civil rights movement. We were going one way. Why is the pendulum swinging?
One of the things that I was thinking about, as Grant was saying, both of us thinking about being on the show today, I have heard for a very long time that the topic of psychology is one of the soft sciences. And even in the work that I do with physical and mental disabilities, often we have trouble with parity. And for the longest time, people have thought mental health issues are really pretty minimal. I think what we're seeing now is they are part of the whole. They are fundamental in terms of how we are as human beings. So where I tend to go with my background is, what's the fear about? Why do different groups, let's take for example, and it's a big example, my right to open carry a firearm. Where did all of that, become such a news item in the last few years? And I think that I try to step back and say, it doesn't matter what my personal views are. I don't have to agree or disagree, but what I can appreciate is that someone feared that their gun rights were going to be taken away. And if you look at some of that argument, it's to not exercise a right is not to even acknowledge the right. Now, other people would say, no, I don't have to exercise that right to know I have the right to do that. It's all still there. There's no fear. But I think with a lot of the different issues, and we're afraid to be afraid. We're afraid to say, what I'm afraid of is if corporations have rights, that this and that will happen, and let's take that apart. I'm afraid if I have to offer contraceptive insurance benefits at my small firm where I employ people, how am I going to go to church then? And how am I going to face my priest and everyone else knowing I'm doing this? And I think we get into too many soundbite kinds of conversations. We don't let people just keep talking until they've fully exhausted their thoughts and feelings on a particular issue. And if you go back to this book that I tend to use with my students, Decisive, we even teach people that they should go with their gut, that we should really follow our emotional barometer. Well, that's just one of many ways to look at making a decision. And I think going back to the students, what they'll say is, a lot of these very tough decisions that we'd like them to be more involved in, they are almost conflict phobic, because to them conflict, the way they've come through the years, has been people screaming at each other, and there's nothing good that comes out of that. So often on the first day of class, to take their pulse, they'll say, I don't care what anybody else wants to do. I just want to make my decisions for myself. And so this last semester, one of the things I challenged them to is, what if we created an intentional community? What if we took the class as looking at what does everyone need to do to have in this class to make it a success? So I looked at us as a little government or community or whatever, if you will, within 35 students. And they all had to be more responsible to each other. So if Anthony decided that day not to come to class, yet it was his turn to be part of the team that makes the meal for the class, he had to find a way to make it up to the group. So every decision he made affected the whole. And yes, there were growth spurts and there was some resistance on that. But I was so moved by what we were able to accomplish in one semester, with really looking at it as a working democracy for one particular class, that I wrote a piece about it for the NMC magazine, about what does it mean for people. An example would be, I thought I knew what they need to be successful, to come and learn and talk the way we are today, that they had transportation needs, and when you go to school at night, you're hungry, and all of that. They got to the point where they had ride pools for every county. They listened to the books on tape in the car and discussed them, and they all went home having made a nutritious, inexpensive, quickly served meal in the class. And they learned. I had people I call the keepers of the vibe. 5 people in the class. After each class, they would send me emails about how they thought it went, both content as well as process. And talk about, I mean, most of us as adults are kind of frustrated with young people not being engaged. And I really got tired of, talking around the water cooler with colleagues about that, and just decided, what if we approached it a little bit differently? So their decision making in terms of really affecting one another. One young man very close to the end of the semester said, my car broke down, I have no money, I can't drive anybody, I can't make any food, I can't do this, you need to cut me some slack. And I said, are you thinking I'm going to call your team and tell them your situation? Kind of silent on the phone. Yeah, he had been pretty rogue. He was a very strong individual student, and he had gone along with this, but he hadn't really immersed. And I said, no, that's not how this works. The way the community works is you have to reach out to your community. A lot of hemming and hawing. He finally did that. They worked it out. They found a role for him and a way to participate. And I think it was probably one of the best teachable moments of the whole semester for him.
What I love about that story is I've been listening to the conversation thinking, there seems to be, at least culturally speaking, whether it's in the news or you see the big stories, where there's this real tension between one side that seems to really go so strong into let me do what I want, that the other side over here says let us tell you what to do. You just have this huge push and you get further and further apart. And it sounds like what you're saying is, even though you're talking with the kids about personal freedom and what they're able to do, you're always putting it in the context of, but you must think about how what you will do will affect others around you and affect the community. So you've added this automatic layer that affirms not only their personal freedoms, but affirms the responsibilities that come with them.
Mm-hmm.
So on a micro level, you prove that human beings can do that, right? Mm-hmm. It's not an elitist concept. Mm-hmm. It's a consensus, it's a listening concept. But now you look at how our government operates, and it doesn't operate on that level.
Right.
It doesn't. And that's where the rub comes, because you get out of Ms. Odgers' wonderful class and totally sculpted. I mean, like a philosopher king running a small country. You can get humans to make good choices. But now, let's say you stand up and you say, one person in the group is an outcast. Okay? As a Muslim, is a black person, it's a person who looks different or sits in a chair or something. When government puts its thumb on the policy balance, it does exactly the opposite of what I think you're trying to do. You're trying to create healthy discourse that is not elitist, it's consensus. That's what we call the marketplace of ideas in the United States. That's why everything that we do, we're supposed to be open to the exchange of ideas that are non-violent, non-injurious.
Isn't that what our House of Representatives and our Senate was kind of supposed to be?
Well, that's what our three-headed government,
So
right?
what's happened, right?
Well,
So what's happened?
yeah, exactly. Money has happened. Most people would say money has happened, and we've replaced a system of voting with a system of contribution. And then we have Hobby Lobby who comes along, or Citizens United and McCutcheon, the decisions that say money is speech. All right, now we're framing the essential task or the policy of elections, and we're framing a new system of government that is the money. This is truly elite. This is truly elite. And so when government puts the thumb on the scale of the policy, in the 50s and 60s, it was on the side of an idealistic, individual initiative where we go in the streets and we carry signs, we talk. It's not scary. It's exciting and it's an idea. And everybody back then was talking about Thomas Jefferson and the Native Americans' thoughts on making decisions. Now, so you want to know our legislature, what it's doing. You know, it's doing away with voting rights protection. Our courts are doing away with voting rights protection. They're doing away. Hobby Lobby says you can tribalize corporate America. You can take your religious beliefs, good, bad, or indifferent, and you can say, we're going to run our employees' lives on our religious tenet. And you know what that does is it's like gerrymandering. What is going on in our political system is the government is allowing, every census period is allowing a tighter and tighter and tighter, more selective identification of each elected official's constituents, right? They're gerrymandering. They're picking a smaller and smaller, more well-defined type of person, so we're all pitching to our own choir.
Are you suggesting that corporations have become a type of constituent?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, they are the constituent. I mean, you know, when 82 of the richest people in America, donate, I don't know what. I mean, Tom knows these figures. But, you know, yeah, it is. It's condensing. And because speech, and it's just like the current issue about internet neutrality, the FCC rules on you can buy your ability to put your content on the internet more quickly, more efficiently, better reception if you pay more. That isn't the way this country ever worked. Everybody, the means of public speech was absolutely democratic. Now it's being stated that you can buy your way to a more advantageous, and the speaker with the bullhorn is heard better than the speaker who's you know.
So how does the conversation go between, let's just say I am theoretically a person with a lot of money who wants a loud bullhorn and I can buy a lot of access to the internet. It's a purely theoretical exercise.
Not so.
Right. How does that conversation happen when it comes to questions of freedom? Because it would seem like on the one hand that I should be free to spend my money, or if I can buy a bigger bullhorn, then I can buy a bigger bullhorn. So how does I know this is a very broad question, but how does that conversation look like when on the one hand you're saying to someone, I need to limit your freedom to act in this way so that the freedoms or others aren't limited, or maybe not necessarily limited, but overshadowed by the things that you're doing. I don't know the answer to that, but what does that conversation look like?
That's what we've always had. We had campaign spending limits. We said individuals can donate a certain amount. Corporations cannot make direct contributions to certain kinds of candidates. I mean, we recognize that money constitutes speech. Money is power.
Right.
And so we always had that. Now we've come up with this cockamamie idea that corporations are people. Now we don't put them in jail, and we don't do a lot of things to them, punish them like we would normal people, but we can be run by them. And that comes out of this crazy 1886 case I was looking at the other day, where a court clerk mislabeled a case called Santa Clara versus Southern Pacific Railway. And if you look at that case, there is no case up until recently, I don't think, that you will find that says a corporation is a person. We are declaring a change in policy at the United States Supreme Court level that is just absolutely clear as a bell, and it's totally a departure.
So it sounds like the problem stems from the concept that, which I think is pretty clear, is that corporations have a pretty obvious motivation, where people make up a whole host of different points of view, perspectives. All of us come together and have to work and live together, and so we're forced to arrive at agreements. That's what government is a contract among people that we
Compromise.
agree to these certain rules to be able to get along. And corporations are unique in that they have one goal. They all have the same goal, which is profit. So that in of itself is an issue. And I think that, I mean, there's two ways to look at the world when we think about just people looking at the world. And one is the world is the way it is, right? And maybe not so good, but I have to find my way through it to get what I want or desire or need. And the other way is to say the world is the way it is, but I think it should change to fit the way I think it ought to be, that kind of idealism or trying to make the world a certain utopia. So I guess the question in all of that is to both of you, it feels like, the corporation issue aside, there's also groups in this country who really want to form their own utopia using our government, that have certain views about how others ought and ought not to act, whether it infringes on the personal or they can somehow make others believe it infringes on other personal rights and freedoms. So gay rights comes to mind in that one.
You want to tee off on this one, Susan?
You look like you were
Okay,
going to
listen,
say
man, I'm
something.
coming out of my seat.
He's ready to go.
Here's the deal. Here's the, and I always say from my humble opinion, it's not, but I am not anti-corporation. I grew up, everybody in Traverse City grew up a Milliken Republican, an Eisenhower Republican, corporate by definition, almost. But the fact is, we've spent hundreds and thousands of years with the Bible, with whatever your religious text is, okay? We all, part of our duty on the earth is to find out what is good, what's ethical, what's moral. Corporations are not that, and that's not their duty on earth. And you just said it. And so what you're doing is you're creating a fiction to allow somebody to take over a human process by calling them human. And they come from, one side is from the planet Earth and someplace else is the planet corporation. Neither one is bad, but they're set on Earth to do different things. And this 5-4 majority, and the great rancorous core of our America is not only in the House or in the Senate where everything passes by a whisker or not at all, but on this 5-4 majority. When the Supreme Court in the 50s decided to ban segregation, they did it unanimously. They reached a decision that we were there. Everything that happens in this world right now is a close call, and that's because everybody has drawn lines in the sand. We are just contentious because we want to be contentious. And right now, the side that says corporate speech, corporate America is the way to run this, is the side that is winning. Whereas for hundreds of years, we've aspired, Reagan, right? He said the house, the light, the city on the hill. Every leader aspired to something, a greater version of compromise. The political science guy you were talking about earlier, politics is the art of compromise. That's one old definition by a guy named Roloffs when I was studying political science. So anyway, I'm disturbed. The limits on public, let me posit this for the discussion, that when I saw the topic for today, the boundaries of personal freedom, I think there always have been some boundaries. You cannot yell fire in a movie theater and call that free speech. That's not. You put boundaries for public health, safety, and welfare. But right now, I reverse that question. I think, can you impose the boundaries that we're imposing, or do we need to be worried that the restrictions, individual restrictions, are being limited so much? Individual rights are being limited so much. With the two exceptions, our privacy is being invaded, or this is being invaded, that is being taken away. I don't know.
I think, Anthony, something that you brought up a little while ago to build on what Kim just said and Grant is this idea of checks and balances. So if the individual you mentioned has the wealth and wants to do different things, what percentage is that individual or that corporation allowed to do that? And the students, one of the things I hear from them a lot is almost needing to step out of the current system and create almost an alternative way of being with the world. And on the one hand, just I think a lot of people are worried that youth are so lethargic and so hopeless, and what do we do when we have a generation that is supposed to lead us forward, which really, who doesn't have much value in the process the way it is and all the contention. But I think when they hear about, okay, so now these new rules with the internet, what they'll say and what I encourage them, just because I want to see that energy plugged in to somewhere is, okay, so what's another way around that? What is a way that a group of people can still keep it free and still keep a way to connect with one another? And that still takes a lot of work to get folks to think that way, because if you're just getting ready to get out of school and you hear that everything is about who has the most wealth and you're in debt from your student loans and all the different things, and there are no jobs and there are all these different things, again, going back to just as human beings where the fears are, so why am I here? Why does it matter? How do I contribute to the process? And that's why in this little microcosm of the classroom, for them to see that they didn't have to wait, the class I was teaching was for Grand Valley, and they would say at the University Center, well, we would like Grand Valley to do such and such, and then they'd look to me and I'd say, I have my own process as an instructor with the school, what you want. And so there's this delightful story where there's an adult woman who has made more meals than she cares to remember, who signed up immediately for the food table, who texted me before she was even home that night and said, no, that was really cowardly of me. The next step for me is to do something so different. I think I need to be the representative from the class to campus. And so that was what I would have chosen for her, but I wanted her to sign up for what she did. Oh my goodness, she became a fabulous advocate on behalf of the class. She's honed her leadership skills. She just got a new job this summer. She is a new person. And so they have had to realize within the class, and 7 books we read, including Sotomayor, the Supreme Court Justice, and how decisions are made, and look at all those different things to see. Now their dilemma is, well, in other classes, they don't do it that way. Or at my job, I tried to try something that we did in class and it didn't work. How do I replicate this in other parts of my life? And how do I problem solve when it's not going exactly the way it did in our class? And so what I want them to think and create and find ways to help each other. And I think we have become so dependent on the dollar that one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm working with a couple colleagues, and we're taking the homeless newspaper to the next level and sustaining it in a different way. And so I've been spending a lot of time with folks who basically camp for now and live outside. And one of them paid me the best compliment the other day. He said, Susan, you think like a homeless person. Because it was something to do with like problem solving, something that you had to do without having any connections or any cash, any money. And there was a way to do it. And so I just think that we need to just crack open all of that different thinking about the way we get things done and the way we treat each other. One of the things that came out of the intentional community was, in the past, if we had a potluck or whatever, I was lucky to get served. Oh yeah, remember the teacher, maybe get her a plate or whatever. Now they would come over and they'd say, are you ready for us to serve you? If someone in that group, you know, when Grant was talking about the narrow individual, we had people in the class who didn't want to participate, or they had really cranky personalities, or whatever made them not the easygoing ones. The class reached out to those individuals and made it work and learned from one another, instead of in the past it would have been hands off.
It makes me wonder, as you're talking, if part of the trend that's happening now in terms of individual freedoms, with a few exceptions, increasingly being diminished, has to do something with an overwhelming sense that the world is too big and too daunting, and I'm so far behind. You were talking about simple things like college debts. But if I'm honest, I often think, when I think of the whole process that you have to go through politically or legally as you're wrangling through these things, to me it is so huge and daunting, and I'm not one who's able to throw money at things. Yeah. I more often than not have this little voice inside my head that says, what's the point? And I'm wondering if that's, are you seeing that in youth today? Are you seeing that they see all these challenges and they see it as invigorating? Or are they seeing all these challenges, whether it be not simply financial, but it could be having to do with freedom and politics and things like that, and they're just going, well, I'm too small?
I think it's both, and I think that's a really tough place to be in, because unlike what Grant and I are saying about when we were coming up and we had supports for our idealism and a lot of things looked a lot differently than they do today, I think they have all the why bother, but then they're 19, 20 years old. What are they supposed to do? Right. You know, it's hard to be depressed forever. It's hard to be angry forever. It's hard to just kind of be in zombie mode. But I think that's also why certain things they use technology, they use different things to kind of check out, because they're trying to figure out exactly your question. How do we do that? That's why if you read so much of what they write, whatever class they're in, you know, they have a whole group of students, really this dystopia idea about the future just being black. When's the last time you went to a movie about the future where things actually worked out? They're all, it's not going to be good. Why bother? You know, it's instead of, I mean, we had the Jetsons, we had all kinds of things where technology was going to be fun and creative, and all these things were going to be designed and whatever. Right. I mean, it's, wow. Right.
That's a great point. Yeah. A lot of young adult literature has a very dark view of the future, but the hero or the heroine is the one who always rises and fights against
independently. And that's kind of what you were talking about, not being part of the group, right? In the literature, the hero is still alone. Yeah. Yeah. So how do we take, I'm sure both of you have a view on this, how do we as a society take the concepts that you're putting into this small group in this classroom and helping these individuals to understand and to become part of a group to a bigger level? I mean, all the way to our government, which we have a population of 300 million or whatever 50. We have in the U.S. Yeah. And again, it's hard not to feel like you're just a minnow in this huge ocean and your vote it's not even worth going to the voting booth. So how do we take those concepts and put them into this society and fuse them in a broader
Well, in my own way, and it goes back to even the way, what you said about my bio. One of the things I like to do are the hot issues. The folks, even if they're polarized, whether we're talking about anything to do with sexuality, gun rights, the corporation as a person, I like to bring those people into the classroom and have that dialogue with the students. So even if they are very polar and from one side of the aisle or whatever's going on with them, I think that it's really good for the students to directly get to use their skills right in their classroom to talk about those things. It wasn't long ago that we in education were told that we needed to be prepared that maybe we were going to carry guns in the classroom, and that was something education was looking at. So I think all of those, and now we have lockdowns, we have all kinds of security measures, and rather than just get a memo, this is what's going to be implemented, one of the things I think is really important is to just really talk with the students. Well, how's everybody thinking and feeling about this? What are the ramifications? What are even some ripple effects we haven't even thought about? Okay, we've got the room locked. How are we all going to get out of here if there's an emergency with a fire or something else? How do we need to deal with that? So I think, and what all of us as human beings, our inclination is, what I do is normal. If you do something weird, you're abnormal. What I do, instead of looking at it as, in my classes, I tell students, there's no normal, abnormal. It's what's typical. It's a frequency count. How often are people doing certain things? Because as soon as they can step away from abnormal and normal. It's the discussion is set up differently. They know from their own code what they're talking about. But what we tend to do is, they're so different, I don't want to engage with them. And that's what we see on all the levels within our society. So I work really hard to bring people in that the students wouldn't have any other access to having those conversations. And thankfully, you know, when I first started teaching 25 years ago, I had to go to Grand Rapids. I had to go way outside of the area to get some people to come in to speak on some of these things. It's all here now. It's all here. And people are pretty open to do that.
So it sounds like you're suggesting empathy and understanding is a huge part of solving the problem.
Absolutely. Really listening to one another, taking the time, all of that. But you jump in here on this too.
Oh, there's no place to jump. I mean, you're right. I mean, and it works on the micro. Again, I think what you're proving and you're helping create is that on a micro or an individual level, if you teach people to listen and respect each other, you know, the world's a hell of a lot better place. I remember when I was a little kid, I asked my mom one day, as you shouldn't, you know, do you love my dad? Do you love Dad every day? And she said, no, but I respect him every day. You know, and that is what you're doing when you're role playing and being empathic. I think, I got to be frank. I think young people are more likely today to create a better world. I think they have fears. I think it's easy to say the world's screwed up, because it really is. The wars are breaking out everywhere. But eventually, if you look at the way they conduct themselves, they communicate. I think individually we're kind of more isolated by our machines, but they communicate jointly. We have Kickstarter campaigns. We have virtual explosions of shared, you know, funny baby pictures doing stupid stuff. You know, little kids doing stupid stuff. But I think there's a world community. There's this Michael Sandel who's spoken to, you know, who runs a 3-continent course, and out of Harvard. I can't remember what the subject, the
What
content.
Money Can't Buy.
Well, he did. That was his book, What Money Can't Buy, and he appeared at the National Writers Series I'm associated with in Traverse City, Doug Stanton's program, and he said, should we sell citizenship? For example, should we? He posed some really good moral and ethical questions, but today, going back to the core idea of youth, what are youth going to do, and what are we creating in the world with all this fear and darkness? They're flooding into squares all over the world. I mean, it's not Taksim, Tahrir, Grant Park. You know, one of my daughters, the night Obama got elected, she said she's going to poll in Indiana with a group of kids, and then she's going to go to Grant Park. And I said, man, if he loses, it's going to be like the day of the locust. And she said, that's the way you live your life. I'm going to go where things are going on. And it was cute. I think they believe perhaps more in their association and relationship with large issues than I did as a growing up. I mean, I was theoretical maybe, but I didn't believe I could go to the place it was happening. And now you do. Which is, if you look at Time magazine this week, Europe is facing, it's got 2,000 young Western Europeans who are joining the jihadi movement. I mean, those are 2,000 people that have picked up and have young people and are going to a absolutely horrifying chance of mortality. I don't know what it is. I can't describe it. But young people are more accepting about fundamental human rights than we were when I was dithering growing up about color of skin and all stuff. I think it's post. I think we are entering a period. But then the question is, if you take the fundamental good possibilities of humankind, you take youth who are exposed more than others, I think, to acting on their impulses to be good. But then you lay over governmental policies, and I don't want to keep being the downer here, but you lay over the restrictions on voting rights, the restrictions on getting to the polls, the restrictions on being heard because some billionaire has bought up all the airwaves. You are doing something different. So I'm with Susan, but I'm also telling you, look at the book. Remember Cormac McCarthy's book, The Road? I mean, that's a grim walk through. That's a grim.
Worse.
I know, and I didn't go to the movie, but you know, he said Cormac McCarthy lives on this think tank out in Santa Fe or around Santa Fe, New Mexico, with his then 11-year-old son. And at the end, you remember the end? I won't buzzkill for anybody watching this. The end of the book. He said it's a book about hope. He said that book is a very hopeful book. You walk through this post-apocalyptic landscape, but you wind up, the kid believes. The kid, and he really, that was his. So anyway,
Well,
I think we're going the
what
same place. We're talking about societal restrictions imposed by government or by the fearmongers. And we haven't talked about that. But, you know, we used to be afraid of communism. Now what are we afraid of? You know, for a while we were afraid of gay people. We were afraid of black people. We got over that. We were afraid of gay people. Now what are we afraid of? You know, you pick, you know, somebody walks in with a turban or, you know, a burqa or something like that. We're afraid. And
Well,
we're
you're
taught
talking
that.
about youth a lot, and we as older adults,
No, we're not
we
old.
haven't.
Come on, you're way
bit
younger.
older.
Don't you start that yet, because
I'm
you're
not a
way younger than I am.
Yeah, but we haven't lived in their shoes. We only think we have because we've been around for
Whose shoes?
the youth.
Today.
I mean, we've
Oh, yeah.
been around for those 18, 19, 20 years, but yet we haven't seen this world from their eyes. We can only see it from what we've already lived through, the civil rights movement, all those things. And so we look at it with that lens, if you will. So maybe they'll react in very different ways, or positive ways, to what the government's
But
doing
we
right
learn
now.
from them.
And
We learn from our kids, don't we?
absolutely.
I mean, I
Well,
want to
there's-
learn from my kids.
Yeah, there's something I picked up in there, and that was about, you mentioned respect to your fellow man. And I was thinking of just the simplest concept, which is are our children today being taught to be courteous? And I'm sure a lot of parents are doing well with that, and I see it, and I see in some and not in others. But I feel there's a trend in our society with the popularity of reality TV, social media, where we can remain somewhat anonymous, to be somehow it's acceptable to be so rude and just go for the throat on things because we can attack and retreat into anonymity. To be anonymous. And so that seems to be, in my view, to be harming our society as well. I think we're
You think that's
diminishing that
true?
idea of just the idea of being respectful to our
Right,
fellow man.
right.
Do you
Right.
think that's true?
Well, one of this intentional community, another part of why it came out was, again, the water cooler talk about why, as instructors, is it now our job also to do all of this parenting of teaching young people manners? I mean, why aren't their parents teaching them this? And what is all of those things you just said, the societal values, all of that? And so one of the things I decided was what I could control in that classroom, I would just see what was possible. And one of the tasks they had was, if we had a guest speaker, a formal thank you letter had to be written. And so there was a team that was responsible for that. Well, it wasn't very early on that they said, well, why can't we just send them an email? And what do you mean? You sent it back to us 3 times when you proofed it, that there were errors in it. I mean, it's too hard. These people aren't even going to remember that they were here as the speakers, and why do we have to do this? And again, it took a lot on my part to not give up, but slow everything down. And where I was raised and where I came from, I know how valuable having great manners are. And what I try to say to my students is, it will so set you apart from people that you're competing with. I mean, let alone, I think, allow you a better experience as a human being. But the idea that they were supposed to be learning it from those adults that they spent most of their time with just wasn't happening, and I don't know all the reasons why that is. But going back to what you said, Kimberly, I think also people are looking for, oh my gosh, how am I heard? Do I have to be rude? I'm afraid that my rights, if I don't speak up for them, and I'm that bulldog at all costs, and they have learned that, again, communicating is supposedly screaming at each other, that what do I do? And so to teach them that there's another way, you know, to be gentle with one another and really listen and all that. But what I've found is it's definitely teachable. You can say, this is the expectation. And I can tell you things, I have, you know, we put our, somebody said recently, you know about a group by the way the chairs are organized. And for the longest time, I've always had my students sit in a big circle, and, you know, they whine about having to move the tables and all that. And just a bunch of it I don't listen to. I just figure, I need to trust that I do know what I'm doing. I know what's best, and that, these kinds of things. But I've had students, especially, like the it girl, the pretty girl that gets everybody else to do everything for her, go running out of the classroom when class is over. She has no responsibility to putting the room back, only to put my hand out, stop her, and say, no, you're part of the room. You have to go back. Now, I have to risk that we're going to have a conflict because she doesn't think that that's part of her responsibility. And I just you have to just gently keep, hanging in there, and it works. It works.
I wonder how much that dynamic of stressing responsibility it helps. I wonder if the lack of responsibility hasn't distorted the discussion on freedoms, going back to speech. That I think there's a tendency to see, okay, we've got free speech, and then you see people in a sense abusing the freedom, being purposefully crude and going out of their way to be offensive, whether it's to get attention or because they feel like they're not being heard. And then I think it's easy to have questions in your minds that go, okay, what's the point of that? And I wonder if maybe a key missing ingredient isn't simply along with the discussion of this is a basic human freedom. It's the second part. This is a basic human responsibility that comes with it if you want this freedom to flourish.
I write a monthly column I have for almost 8 years for the Record Eagle, and it's about health and disability and it's about life. And one of the most responded to column was, what's funny? How far can we go? And again, if you look at, it had to do with, something that Joan Rivers said about a particular disability group, and there was a lot of upset about that. And so I, weighed in on it and talked about a lot of different issues. But I think young people are looking at that too. Some of the celebrities in their lives and people that they see that we put up on platforms and idolize are people that are rude and making fun of other people, and it's just another part of having the conversation. So,
certainly our politicians, I think, who were originally meant to be leaders, are kind of acting like jerks, and so they're not. Well, they're not modeling good leadership. They're being politicians, right?
And why are they doing that?
Yeah.
Right, it's insecurity, right? Most of the time when people act badly, it's not because they're bad people, it's because they're insecure and they're out of place. Jay-Z was on NPR one time talking about rappers grabbing their crotch when they're on, and he had a fabulous analysis. He said, geez, we're insecure, man. I'm up on stage, I got 50,000 people looking at me. I've never been up there before. I just do this thing. And I think that's the way, in the legal system. You run into lawyers who are just insufferable. I mean, they're out of the box, tough, and it usually comes from insecurity. I think all these funny people carrying guns into schools. What is that about? Or demanding that right. There's anger. There's insecurity. We were talking
fear.
about
She said fear several times. I think
and
it
this
sounds
other
like
thing,
it boils
this
down to
disrespectful thing. I think that's sort of a dinner table deal. I don't know if that's this discussion, but that's when we grew up and we had to sit down at a certain time and have clean hands. And but this societal disrespect, which we see emanating from the top, where somebody yells out while a governmental official's talking, calls her a liar or something like that, or Pelosi going with the CIA director Brennan back and forth, not Feinstein. But that is something that is a little bit different. That's new. That's because those people are old enough. They learned at the kitchen table how to be nice. But there's a different form of government. And that's why I go back round circle to this thing. I think we are living in a different age at the top. I think we will always live in the same age, I think, at the human level of society. But there is something different emanating from the top.
I read recently that if you're emotionally passionate about a subject, you're not necessarily as knowledgeable about it in making an argument. The calmer you are, you're essentially presenting facts, so you're pretty sure on that side of the argument. I thought that was really interesting. So in the few seconds we have left, I'll give you the final word in response to that concept.
Always be suspicious of the easy answer. if it's religion, if it's a slogan, if it's a bumper sticker. There's good thought that's gone into a lot of the society, and if you can not fall for who we're afraid of, who we're supposed to be afraid of, do stupid things like war on drugs to respond to poverty, that kind of thing. Beware the easy answer and look complex.
Susan?
Be passionate about the process you use to live your life, and that doesn't mean that you're not engaged and alive. Just look at all the variables that go into how you make decisions in the process, and you'll be pleased with the end result. Absolutely.
Excellent. Great final words.
Good.
Thank you two so much for being with us today.
Thanks.
Great subject. And thank you at home for watching In Focus.